to PSA TV and Avalon Williams. Today we were invited to Mr. Michael Annisette home, where we sit with him and chat about on the labor movement, the direction it's heading, the state of the economy, and also, what he does in his spare time. So we're going to toss that interview this morning to catch up on some insight into Mr. Annisette's history, his time being president of the SWWT and also General Secretary of NATUC. So stay tuned for that interview. How long have you been a member of the SWWT? You were president and also general secretary for NATUC.
Well, I've been an employee at the Port Authority the 15th of September 1972. Okay, from there I became the secretary of the junior staff branch 4 years after. So that would be in 1976. And immediately after, I became a grievance officer for the Seamen and Waterfront Workers Trade Union. I would have been the Assistant Secretary General for one term, 2 terms actually, and I became the President General for the last 10 to 12 years. In terms of NATUC, I would have served as President for 2 terms, and I'm now General Secretary, and this is my second term as General Secretary.
How much longer will you serve in the trade union, Ms. Annisette?
Well, my idea about the trade union movement is not about the movement. It's a love for seeking what is right for the people of Trinidad and Tobago, and I don't think that have a time span. All right, that is something that don't come out of your DNA. And even though if not with the trade union movement, the issue of being an activist, the issue of speaking out for truth, the issue of wanting to see a better Trinidad and Tobago will always be part of who I am and what I will do. So that in terms of my activities coming to an end, it will come to an end when the good Lord decides to take me to another part of this world.
Mm-hmm. What are your major achievements and legacy?
Legacies, again, I don't talk about legacies. History will judge that, not me. And I'm not the one who speaks about legacies and achievement, because when you start to compare in life, life is good and bad. And when something is good, something will be bad. And when something is bad, something can be good. And I've learned in my life journey, comparisons and legacies is not what you want. What you need to do is to do what you believe is right. And that is what is important, not legacies.
What are your vision for the trade union movement?
The trade union movement has already formed their vision in my own view, because the trade union movement is necessary. One has to understand historically that the government never gave the workers anything. One has to understand the formation of the trade union movement and why it was formed. It was always formed against a backdrop where there was a political system, an economic system, which we call capitalism. There was slavery and several other kinds of system that will always pit the weak against the strong, or vice versa. The strong, which is in a minority, dictating to what happened to the majority. So it is always necessary for the trade union movement to be there in order to have what I want to call a counterbalance in terms of forces, in terms of what happened. And everything that we would have gotten as workers, right, was through the trade union movement making sacrifices and workers making sacrifices. And that will not change until the system, in my view, changes, where we speak about a system where fairness, equity, and the right for everybody to share the natural resources of any country becomes a reality and not just a pipe dream.
What are the challenges in negotiating with the government? If you could just recap on some of those you encountered.
Well, the government, as the major employer, has been one of the biggest disappointments, in my view. And I say that against the backdrop. As I speak to you, you are quite aware that there are academic staff from the Cipriani Labour College who would not have gotten a wage increase since 2007. In other words, the large wage increase they got was 2007. There are government daily and monthly paid workers. There are public servants, port workers from the Institute of Marine Affairs, from HGC, from WASA, and I can go on, who are all government employees who are now being asked to live in 2020 on 2007 salaries and in some instances 2012 salaries. That is a natural phenomenon of the government in power, regardless of which government is in power. And it is something that I believe that we have to pay particular attention to. Because what that does, in my view, is to take away the purchasing power of the workers of Trinidad and Tobago. And I say that in the context that we are the one who drives the economy. We are the ones that buy the goods and services. And when you take away the ability for us to purchase the goods and service that is being manufactured in Trinidad and Tobago, what can happen and what will happen is that the business is going to slow down and all the consequences going to flow from that. So we in the National Trade Union Center, we have made a conscious decision to start to negotiate on the basis of meeting the government before the expiry date of collective agreements, so that the implementation stage of the agreements will be not 3 or 4 years or 12 years after or 13 years after, but it will be within the collective bargaining period, thereby giving the workers a level of financial flexibility as opposed to a situation where your purchasing power is minimized to the extent that it doesn't make sense to go to work in some instances.
How does politics impact the negotiations?
Government is about politics. And at times, life is about politics too. Because whatever decision that is taken by the government affects you. And the very existence of life is politics in my view. So politics will impact negotiations in the context, in some instances, who support or who didn't support the government, and who, I don't want to say is in bed, but who will have an interface with the government most times within the Caribbean region in particular will be the trade union movement or federation that is more favored by the government. And in most of the instances, the government pit one federation or one union against the other. The issue of divide and rule becomes so paramount and so focused that it doesn't augurs well for the workers in Trinidad and Tobago. So yes, politics has a lot to do with what happens in negotiations in Trinidad and Tobago in particularly, and it's unfortunate, but it is a reality, and it is something that we as trade unionists, we as workers must understand, that we must not allow the politicians to play us that game of divide and rule, so that when there are issues of bread and butter, what happens? For example, I've never gone to the grocery or the market or to the bank and they say, are you from PNM or UNC? All right? All they would need to understand is whether or not you have the money to be able to pay for the goods and services. And that should tells us something. There's a lesson for us as workers, but unfortunately we get tied up in this mass way of dealing with business that political parties. And when you look at what happens at election time, where the very workers who will be affected by decisions and who are affected by decisions that the government make, and how they go out there and wave the flag and support the very government. And when the election is over, they go back to the same problems. I think it is something that requires the trade union movement to work towards educating workers so that workers will understand that when you're talking about bread and butter issues, when you're talking about your children's future, when you're talking about a better Trinidad and Tobago, it supersedes any political party, and therefore we must have the wisdom and the knowledge to go beyond that. And in so doing, I believe we'll be able to rein in on the politicians so that we'll get a better Trinidad and Tobago.
Was the last government any better than the present?
Again, as I said, I don't make judgments about good and better, because when you start to do that, the ego steps in. Because if you deal with people, this one good and this one better, that's a ego thought. That's a personal opinion, and it could blind your mind. So what I deal with is issues as opposed to who is good or who is better. Who am I, as Michael and Annisette, to determine if you are better than me or I'm better than any individual. I don't live that kind of life. That is my philosophy, and I'm guided by what is right, as opposed to who good and who is better, because that is an ego trip, and it's a trip that I don't like.
What percent of the national workforce is unionized, and is there a decrease, and why?
Yeah, there is a decrease, and it's not a phenomenon that is unique to the Caribbean region. It's something that is all over the globe. It's a global phenomenon. And the question why? With the new world of work, with the question of contract labor, with the question of outsourcing jobs, with the questions of people now working at their homes, with the question of the digital age, the computer age, all these kinds of issues has impacted on the workforce. And therefore what the trade union needs to do is to look at themselves and rebrand themselves and re-architect themselves in order to be relevant to the real world of work as we know it. The world of work is not like we know it many years ago. And as I said, it's a phenomenon that is not unique to Trinidad. It's all over the Caribbean. It's all over the world. And the trade union movement must change with the world, or we will end up like the dinosaurs.
Sure. Is the IRA relevant to the practice of industrial relations? Does it serve the interests of the working class?
The Industrial Relations Act was constructed under a particular situation and dynamics. And just like life, business is evolving. And if the laws which conduct workers' affairs is not evolving with the change of the world, well, in my view, that the Act would not be relevant. Am I saying that the Act needs to be changed? I'm saying yes, the Act needs to be more relevant and more suited to the realities that we are facing in the world today. Let me give you an example. If I want to organize a group of workers, the employer has a say. And there are situations in Trinidad and Tobago where employers go to the court, and it will take us as much as 10, 12, in some 15 years before we can get recognition to represent workers. And I'm asking the question aloud. Why should an employer determine for me as a worker who should represent me? And I think it demonstrates how the law is constructed to suit a certain group of people, and it's not really constructed with the view of making workers really free as workers, but to keep us in a particular tight rope as it relates to jobs, as it relates to the economy, as it relates to how employers treat you. It's unfortunate, but it is a reality. In my view, it's another form of slavery, but in a different in modern slavery as opposed to the olden days when the slave master was behind you and with the whip. But it is the same thing because there is too much constraints that is placed on the trade union movement and by extension the workers that has no relevance in a modern society.
Mm-hmm. Should the labor movement establish its own political party and seek to form the government?
All right, let me speak to that. The history of the trade union movement forming their own political party is real.
Mm-hmm.
All right, and there is this mistaken view, in my opinion, that if you have a labor government, that things is going to go right and you will represent labor, the government. But that is a misrepresentation because the facts do not borne that out. Why? When the government gets into power, they operate within a political system whereby they cannot operate independent of that system. In other words, it's a capitalist system. In other areas, it's a neoliberal system where business, big business, and money and finance dictates what happens. And until that is changed, having a labor government will not and cannot change anything. I mean, there are historical data to support that. Let me give you an example. In Jamaica, when Manley took over, there was efforts by foreign powers to ensure that he doesn't see the light of the day. And we know what happened in Siaga and Manley's. We knew what happened in Grenada when Maurice Bishop took over, and he was trying to build a new kind of society using the culture and the history of his people to better the country. We saw it in Nicaragua when a so-called leftist government took over. We saw it in Cuba. All right, and we need to pay attention to these things, and we need to speak to the truth. The world is run in a particular way where capital and big business and corporate power rules the world. And until and unless we understand that and we work towards changing that, we're going to have all these issues. I'll give you another example. When Barack Obama became president, the first black man, there was a lot of expectations. There's a lot of hope. And people misunderstood then that the president cannot change a political system. It's the people has to change it. And therefore, a lot of people felt deflated when he left office because he wasn't able to produce the changes that one was expected for him to produce, being a black man. And that's a reality that we have to understand. And the system in Trinidad is no different. Corporate power is who finance most of the political party. And if I'm paying the piper, who is going to call the political tunes? And that's a reality. So I am not going to get what I want to say bogged down with a Labour Party. What I will say is that we as trade unionists have to understand, or as workers, we have to be independent of the system, meaning that we have to build our own businesses. We have to understand, we have to build our communities where our money goes back into the community rather than go to the other 1%. And people don't like it to say that, but that's a reality. And until we understand that economic and financial realities, we're going to be stuck every day talking about, marching every day. Until we become financially independent, until we are independent economically, until we begin to build our own businesses, all right, until we begin to support our own businesses, well then we will get nowhere. And no political party, be it the Conservative Party, be the Leftist Party, be it a Labour Party, can change that reality. The issue in this world, it is a capitalist world. And even though if you have a communist country like in Russia, and people don't like me to say that, it was a bourgeoisie leftist party where certain people within the system, the communist system, benefited much more than the workers. And it's a reflection of the book, I don't know if you ever read it, Animal Farm, which tells the true story of what the political system means to the average person. Yes, they talk about workers. Yes, we're going to support workers, but in reality, there's an oligarchy where they control everything. And we, as workers, are left to pick up the crumbs. And the answer to that is not to change the political system, but to work within the political system to have the independence that is necessary so you could talk in the context of being independent and they will listen to you. Because in the system, your voice is heard every 5 years or when there's a protest. And after that, what? What are the benefits that is gained from those kinds of situations? All right, think about it. The workers form a workers' co-op. Think about it, the workers, the communities begin to build their own community where their money within the community is generated work and jobs and finances within the community. Think about the independence that can have. Think about the powers that can have for the communities and by extension workers and them. And I think that is the approach that we have to take, because the political system, outside of having a mass revolution, will remain as it is, because corporate power is powerful and you won't be able to change that by just rhetorics or by just marching or by just changing the laws.
Do you think for this year, I know that a lot of trade union leaders, including Mr. Duke and yourself, have been calling for negotiations. Do you think public servants will see some sort of result this year, seeing that we have the general election close?
No, listen, it's unfortunate, but I will say it. There's a level of arrogance and insensitivity by this government that I've never seen. I am quite satisfied that the narrative that there is no money, it's a narrative that was created in order for the government to do certain things. And while the government is saying, e.g., that they don't want to go to the IMF, the measures that the government has implemented against the workers is IMF and World Bank measures. The question of not completing negotiations, that is what we will call a unilateral decision to have a wage freeze. And it is a wage freeze. That is what, and you are asking the very same workers who will not receive their salaries for the 8-year period, and in some instance 13 years period. You are asking them to produce, you are asking them to be productive, you are calling them lazy, you are saying that public servants only work when it's time for them to get paid, and that is when they make noise, which is so unfair. So that I don't think that election has anything to do with it, I think it's a philosophy and it is a strategy that has been dictated by the government to suit certain peoples, to keep wages down of public servants and government workers, to justify a narrative that I made the treasury empty, that there's no money in the treasury and therefore I cannot pay wages to workers and them. But having said that, when one looks at all the projects that is happening in Trinidad and Tobago, one must ask themselves whether the health system, whether workers' wages, whether beds in the hospital, shouldn't that take priority over building new highways and roadways? Or I'm going to Australia to buy 2 brand new vessels when we could have fixed our vessels in Trinidad and Tobago, but because of political spite and vindictiveness that you would have allowed the sea bridge to collapse. Those are realities. People don't like it to talk about those things, but those are the realities. And until we are able as a society to be brutally frank, and until we are able to bring the issues on the table without bringing the personalities, we're going to find ourselves where we are. How could you justify, as a government, the collapse of the sea bridge and the minister is still working there? And how do you justify then that you remove several other ministers for not working or not doing what they're supposed to do? Is it that that in the new political dispensation, that money trumps common sense, money trumps principles, money trumps ethical behavior? Is it that the political party now is structured in such a way that if you have money, you become the boss, or you become a minister, or you become a deputy political leader? And if that is yes, we are in a sad place as a society, because money can never be king, and money corrupts, and plenty money corrupts absolutely.
Just come down a bit with the interview. What do you do, on your spare time? I mean, I know that you hold a position with NATUC, with SWWTU and stuff like that. How does Michael Annisette spend his day alone?
Michael Annisette likes to read. Michael Annisette likes knowledge. Michael Annisette loves his grandchildren. Michael Annisette would like to see his grandchildren get a better place. I would like to educate them and show them life, because I've learned so many things in my journey that wasn't taught to me by my grandmother and my fathers, and I don't want to make that same mistake. So my joy is my children. My joy is seeking wisdom. My joy is trying to understand the universal powers that guide every human being, so I'll be able to align myself with those powers, so I can go in a particular direction and be part of what the universal powers say we're supposed to be. Because I don't believe that a man is God. I believe there's a bigger force, and therefore we need to find a way to understand that other force, so that we can align ourselves or realign ourselves with that force. And that's my dream. That is my goal. That is what I try to work towards. But I am human. I do make mistakes like anybody. I fall down, but I get back up and I start all over again. And I recognize that, listen, you don't give up in life, because life, good and bad, comes from the same place. All right. Brightness and darkness come from the same place. And you have to understand life, because when rain is falling, you don't see sun. And when sun is out, you don't see rain. Okay, and when snow is falling, you don't see the sun. But at the ending of the day, when the breeze finish blow, with the storm finish, there's always a calm. And that's a lesson that I have learned. Before a storm, there's a calm. And everything in life has a reason and a purpose. And if we understand that, we'll be in a pathway to understanding. And there's a saying again that I always like to talk, to quote and say, and that is for people to understand. And you have to understand that what is a bright person? All right, a rich man, all right, but a poor man's teacher. And what is a poor man? But a rich man's job. And if you don't understand that, in my view, you wouldn't have wisdom, because that is the life story of everything in this world.
Well said. Ms. Annisette, I just want to end the interview and, thank you for inviting us to your home to get this recorded, and ask you for your closing comment, a message you can send to the trade union movement.
Well, it's not the trade union movement. I will want to send a message to the people of Trinidad and Tobago. I want the people of Trinidad and Tobago to understand that the government don't owe you a house. That is the government rights to supply houses for each citizen of Trinidad and Tobago. And not because the government gives you a house, that is a right for you to vote for them. I am saying that the government owes to the people of Trinidad and Tobago to have a crime-free society. That is the government responsibility. The government has a responsibility to ensure that we have all the drugs and beds in our hospitals to accommodate the citizenry of Trinidad and Tobago. That is their responsibility. It is not a favor that we are asking. But more importantly, I want the citizens to understand that it's our tax that the government takes from it that generates revenue, that causes the government to do a lot of things. And if it is our money, we must have a right to say how we want our money spent. We must have a right to demand accountability from the government, regardless of who is in power. This has nothing to do with PNM. This has to do with a principle. And until we hold politicians accountable, until we hold the institutions accountable, until we hold trade unionists accountable and the church accountable, you understand, we will be at a place where anything can happen and anything goes for governance in your country. And that is a sure way of destruction. So the point that I'm making is that we are the change. We are the future. And vice versa. We can be our own destruction. So it is in our hands to make the Trinidad that we want. And it should not be dictated by any politicians, by any businessman, or by anybody. It has to be a collective approach. And if we understand that, and if we understand the power that we have as individual citizens of Trinidad and Tobago, well then we will have a better Trinidad and Tobago.